Thanks very much. I have to say I'm a little nervous speaking to you today about Heritage Week because I suppose to a certain extent I don't feel that we do anything particularly different or I suppose out of the box compared to what a lot of people do. But in some ways, hopefully by describing my experience in programming for the Pearse Museum over the last few years, there might be something that you can learn from. Sometimes I think if you see something very, very impressive, it can almost be intimidating. I have a colleague, when I was on the Irish Museums Association, we would get very high-powered people over from museums in New York, and he said, but does it really mean a lot to the people then on Monday when they go into work and they're facing a blocked toilet or a leaky roof? So, as I said, this is very much the experience of a site that doesn't have huge financial resources, doesn't have a huge staff, but I suppose it's very much about how do you make the most of what you have. As Niamh said, for the last few years I've been the curator of the Pearse Museum. I've actually recently shifted within the OPW. I'm now mostly based in Kilmainham Jail, which is a very different beast altogether. But just to talk a little bit, just in case any of you aren't familiar with the Pearse Museum, it's the former home and school of Patrick Pearse. It's located in Rathfarnham in the suburbs of Dublin, just near, just as the mountains begin to rise. In terms of a location, it has certain challenges. I think sometimes people imagine that because you're in Dublin, you have huge kind of audiences to call upon, but the suburbs are kind of difficult sometimes. You end up being neither fish nor fowl. You're neither a city centre location, nor are you kind of a destination out in the countryside. So as a museum, we have to fight to get people to visit us and to get people to engage. The museum is based, as I said, in this kind of 18th century house that Pearse ran his school in between 1910 and 1916. We have a permanent exhibition. We also have historic rooms. So it's I suppose, that kind of museum. The other thing that we have that's very important, as I'll be discussing later, is it's a classic Irish house because there are many extensions. And one of the extensions in the early 20th century was of a billiard room, which then was transformed by Pearse into a study hall, or I suppose school assembly hall. It seats 60 people, and probably it's our greatest asset when it comes to Heritage Week, to have a space to hold events. It's a very, very basic thing, but it can really determine what you're able to do, I find. So we're very lucky in that. Our other, I suppose, great resource is the fact that the museum is surrounded by a park of 50 acres. It's a designed romantic landscape, so it's kind of designed to look wild. But also, as I said, in terms of its geographical location, we're just at the beginning of the Wicklow Mountains, so it has, I suppose, kind of lots of very attractive natural features. There's a lake, there's a stream. There's also a very interesting collection of 18th century follies, and we also have a nature room as well, which is open to the public that people can come and visit. So again, that's a great advantage to us in terms of Heritage Week, because it kind of gives us two strings to our bow. So we have, I suppose, history in terms of the house and the museum, and then we have the natural world in relation to the park. So we get to cover a lot of bases with that. So that gives us a lot of opportunity in terms of our programming. And particularly last year, when the theme was all about kind of the natural world, it was great that we had that resource to hand. So just to give you an example of, I suppose, of what we did last year for 2017, we had 19 separate events which were attended by over 1,200 people. And I suppose to put that in context, our visitor numbers last year were in around kind of 35,000. So that's quite, a significant part of our yearly visitor numbers. And as I said, there's 19 separate events. Now, some of those events were the same thing run on different days. But it's all about, I suppose, giving people opportunity to take part. So this is the program that we did for 2017. Realize it's quite small because trying to cram a lot of things in, but it's a lot of the things that you probably do yourselves: lectures, concerts, nature walks, children's workshops. And one of the things that we do that I find very successful is, in addition to having the Heritage Week booklet, is to have something like this, a poster or a leaflet that people can pick up, particularly if you have a lot of events. Because what I find is we have so many events that like our notice board becomes kind of chock-a-block with posters. So it's great to have something that people can look at a glance, that they can take away with them. And I suppose the other thing as well is, what I've started to notice is people will, if you have a program, they'll say, okay, this year we're going to go to this event, and this event on that site. So they kind of program their week around us. So as I said, these have been really, really useful, and a member of staff does that as well. That's 2016's event, and again, it's, you're quite a distance from it. Last year we tried to have a nature theme. Obviously 2016, there was very much an Easter Rising theme, but to a certain extent in the Pearse Museum there's always an Easter Rising theme to what we do. But you'll also see that in some way that there are some events as well that we will kind of repeat from year to year because we know they're successful and we know that they're popular. So in terms of, I suppose, starting thinking about what to do for Heritage Week, I think sometimes it's very useful just to sit down and just think, well, what do we have? What are our assets? And the easy column is the tangible side. So things like facilities. So as I mentioned, one of our big advantages is we have a big hall, which has great acoustics. That's very pleasant for lectures and concerts. Finances obviously is something that we all have to think about. We don't have a huge budget for Heritage Week. There is a budget within the OPW that we can apply for. It's somewhat discretionary. But I suppose whatever money you have, I always think it's good to know what money you do have to begin with. I remember during the crash when we knew that the centenary of the Rising was coming up, but because of the crash there was no information about what funding would be available, and I said, well, if we only have €5, at least if we know we have €5 we can plan something for €5. So once you know what money you have, you can plan accordingly. The other thing then is to look at things like infrastructure, and that can be something as basic as, do you have a camera for PowerPoint, do you have screens, do you have seating for people? The other big asset I think that we have in terms of Heritage Week is an audience, and it can be very useful to think about what audience you have already that will be willing to engage in Heritage Week, because in some ways I feel like the audience that comes to all your events and everything you do during the year, they can be really good to, I suppose, to kind of build upon, and they're very kind of important asset to have. The other thing that I look at as well is, what are existing programs that you might have on your site, and how can you maybe incorporate those existing programs into what you're doing for Heritage Week? So over the summer in the Pearse Museum, for example, we have outdoor concerts. We usually have about 4 on a Sunday throughout the summer. So what I do then is just make sure that we have one of those concerts coinciding with Heritage Week. And what happens then is it becomes something that was being attended by maybe a core audience who goes to that program, and you draw in a whole new audience then because you have Heritage Week. And obviously it's a great way as well to advertise the kind of thing that you do. And that's what I suppose in terms of the title of what I would say of my talk today, making Heritage Week work for you. I think it's important as well to use Heritage Week to create, I suppose, a legacy for the site to a certain extent. So you use Heritage Week to promote other programs that you're having, so that people who maybe come for that week in August might then start coming to other events that you have during the rest of the year. The other thing is it's great for things like Facebook to show activity on the site, to generate interest. So people who might not have been able to attend anything for Heritage Week might start to think, I didn't get there that week, but if they have something else on, I'd like to go and try it. And then the other, I suppose, very tangible and key thing is staff skills. So, even if you have a small staff, I think in Heritage in particular, I'm always amazed by a lot of people have come to Heritage from other lives, and they come with all kinds of skills, and sometimes quite unexpected. So, you know, I have a colleague who, she has a guide who was hired for his skills as a guide and his historical knowledge, but he also has a great interest in nature and does nature events for them. Similarly, I have a guide who's had a background in graphic design, so not only is he able to do posters, but as we'll see later, he's also able to kind of art workshops and things like that for kids. So it's good to, I suppose, to talk to staff and to try and encourage people to come up with ideas as well, and to bring, as I said, the skills that they have from life outside. The intangible assets that we have are sometimes, I think, the things that we perhaps don't value as much, but are actually, in many ways, the most important things we have in relation to Heritage Week. And on a very basic level, it's things like stories. So, you know, we all have sites with stories to tell. And sometimes it can be hard to find the opportunity to share those. And Heritage Week, I think, is a great excuse to do that. So, so throughout the year, I try to think about, that's an interesting angle in terms of the history of the site. Maybe that is something that we could kind of build upon for Heritage Week. The other, I suppose, intangible asset then is ideas and, you know, I suppose our imagination as people who work in this area. And I feel it's very important that's not undervalued as well. That can be really, really important in terms of the success of Heritage Week. And I always feel Heritage Week can be a great time to try new things, something that you've been wanting to do. Sometimes not everything you do is a success. I've been in our lecture hall looking, squinting out the window, hoping that maybe 2 more people would come, so that so it wouldn't be totally embarrassing for the poor speaker. But the other thing is, nobody's ever damaged by an under-attended event. It's, you try something, it maybe doesn't work as well as you'd hoped, but as nobody's died, nobody's been injured, and often you can have events where you have 3 people, but the enthusiasm and the interest of those 3 people could be equal to a room full of bored people with a dull speaker. On that as well, one of the things during Heritage Week, often I try to kind of say, well, if I've been doing kind of research that year, I say, this might be the opportunity to share this. And I remember a few years ago as well, we got a conservation grant from the Heritage Council, and a part of the deal was that we had to do something for Heritage Week around it. And I didn't know how interested the public would be in a talk about conserving the Pearson Sons account book. Not a huge amount of interest, I have to say. But the good thing was the main speaker, there was 2 speakers and one of them was me, so I always feel, if we're going to have a bad audience, if the bad audience is for me, that's just fine. I also usually slot myself on the Friday night, which is the less popular night, because I said I think my ego can take a small audience. So the other thing to think about as well is your experience. If you've been doing Heritage Week for a few years, you after a while, I think you kind of know how it works. Now there is a danger to a certain that you get stuck in the same pattern, but that experience of knowing what works, what will appeal to people, I find that is invaluable, and in some ways it kind of frees you up then. When you know something works, it frees you up to kind of do maybe something new or different as well with Heritage Week. Enthusiasm is hugely important. What I find in terms of the benefit for Heritage Week for our site is it gives a real kind of lift to everybody, I find, certainly with the staff. We have a really busy week, a lot of people very enthusiastic about what we're offering, and that can be really, really good. And I feel particularly at the end of the summer, there's something about Heritage Week, even though it's kind of manic and very busy, that it really does kind of lift everybody's spirits at the end of the summer, and kind of gives a nice kind of sense of closure to the busiest part of the year. And it's great as well for getting, your visitors enthusiastic about what you're doing as well. And goodwill as well, which is the goodwill that you can draw on from Heritage Week, again, it can often be your secret weapon, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. As I said, there's a lot to be said for tried and trusted events. So you can see here with this a lecture by Brendan Walsh, who's he's the professor of education in DCU, and I've known Brendan for years. You know, people are interested, not surprisingly, people who come to the Pearse Museum are interested in finding out more about Pearse, and it was a great opportunity as well to invite him because he had done kind of a lot of research with us many years before for his PhD. We also have a concert here with Oisin Morrison. Oisin I first met through a group called Cordan Cruha, the Friends of the Harp. They hold a concert with us every year, and he was their guest performer one year, and he lives locally. And I got him to do a couple of things for Heritage Week over the years, and then I discovered that he'd also written a piece of music called The Children of Lear. So it was great to be able to invite him along, because I suppose we'd been part of his developing career, and he's kind of going from strength to strength. The fact that he was local, and of course the theme of the Children of Lear in Irish mythology is so appropriate for the Pearse Museum and St. Enda's. So as I said, every year I'll always have a few lectures, always have some concerts, because I know, particularly the concerts, we'll have waiting lists, we'll have people wanting to come and see these events. As I said, we also kind of draw on existing programs. So you can see there's an outdoor concert in our courtyard. We also have an existing program, and again, this ties into what I was saying about staff resources as well. We have a whole load of gardeners, very skilled gardeners in St. Enda's, and they're great communicators. So throughout the summer, we do garden demonstrations, but we always make sure that we do at least 2 for Heritage Week. And again, people who come to the park are really curious about how do you grow this? They see things that people do, but they don't necessarily know how they can ask. So these gardening demonstrations are great, not only to, I suppose, to share the knowledge of our staff, but also, I suppose, as a way of communicating with the people who visit the park every day, because, people can visit every day, and you might never really interact. As long, if they keep their dog on a lead, you might never have to talk to them. They don't, you do. But again, it's a great way of kind of building relationships. The other thing that is so important for us in terms of Heritage Week, and one of the main reasons that I always argue for it is it allows us to reach this whole new audience. The booklet, the website, it goes to places that we don't seem to be able to reach, and it also catches people who are actively looking for what we're offering. So one of the things we do during the summer, a few years ago, we did a lot of work conserving these very unusual, very interesting 18th century follies around the park. So we have, they're mostly date from the kind of late 18th, early 19th century. The guy who built the house and laid out the park, a guy called Edward Hudson, he's kind of an amateur antiquarian. So he filled the park not with follies inspired by ancient Rome or kind of Gothic history, but by Irish field monuments. So we have a fake cromlech, we have a fake dolmen. The property was originally called the Hermitage, so we have a hermit's cave. And we also have this funny little building here. It's a gate lodge, but it's built as a mini fort, like an 18th century fort, and it's built in the shape of a 5-pointed star. And it was lived in up until the 1960s. People are always very curious about it. And we do these tours every Saturday and Sunday throughout the summer. But again, you don't always know if you're reaching the audience, as big an audience as you want. So every year we also include this in as part of our program, and we get a whole new audience. And huge numbers then, because people are very curious about seeing inside these buildings and finding out more about them. So as I said, it can be a great way of just letting people know about what you're doing all the time anyway. And I said, mostly we would advertise either through posters, obviously there's a booklet, Facebook, we put stuff on our website as well. And in addition then, particularly for I suppose, the events that we're putting on, especially for Heritage Week, we'll do up maybe a poster as well, just to kind of engage people a little bit more. And again, you can see I'm calling on the skills of a member of staff. Then the other thing, the goodwill I mentioned. So I was thinking about that scene in The Godfather at the wedding where he helps out Mr. Bonacere and he says, someday, and that day may never come, I will call upon you to do a service for me. We're always helping people, I think, on heritage sites. You know, we're facilitating research, we're providing places for launches, we're sharing our knowledge, our information, and that's what we're there for, and we're all happy to do it. But it also means that we build up a lot of goodwill. So one of the things I try and do over the year is, if we've been involved in helping somebody with a particular project, and they say, oh, if there's anything I can do for you, you have something to ask them to do for you, and that's to do something for Heritage Week. And to be honest, often they're really pleased about being able to do something. You kind of forget as well that, because you're there all the day, that it's a big thing for people sometimes to come and do a talk or do a concert in your property. So this is just an example. Over the last few years, I was helping two sisters, Teresa and Mary Louise O'Donnell, who were researching a book about the sisters of Patrick and William Pearse, Margaret and Mary Bridget. And they launched their book with us. And again, they said, listen, if there's anything we can come and do something in the Pearse Museum. And what's great about them, as well as doing this historical research, they're both very gifted musicians and singers. So they put on a whole evening for us, combining their research on the history of the Pearse sisters with music, some of it coming from music that had been arranged by Patrick Pearse's sister, Mary Bridget. In 2016, we had as you might imagine, a fairly crazy year in the Pearse Museum. And my attitude in 2016 was, because it was, I suppose, a kind of not even a once in a lifetime event, we tried to facilitate as many cultural groups and community groups who wanted to be involved in the Pearse Museum and St. Enda's and do something there over the course of the year. So it was an incredibly busy year. We did a lot of drama as well. So we Ballally Players, who are a local theatre group, they did a production of Pearse's the King. Rathfarnham Theatre Group, who've always done stuff with us over the years, they did a special concert and a performance of a play by James Connolly. And these young people here, they did they're from Tallaght Community Arts, which is it's a professional community arts organisation which works with young people. And they did an amazing pageant in July in the grounds. They'd been working on it for 2 years. They performed it when the President came to visit for the state ceremonial event in July. So I said we've been working with them and lots of other theatre groups as well. There were a whole load of other plays, but they were three that we'd a very good relationship with. And 2016 was also perhaps less associated with the Pearse Museum, was also the 400th anniversary of the death of Shakespeare. Shakespeare died on the 23rd of April, 1616. 23rd of April 1916 was Easter Sunday, the day that the Rising was supposed to have gone ahead until it was postponed by a day. And probably what's less well known is the fact that Shakespeare is Pearse's favourite writer. He's kind of quite obsessed by him. We have amazing collections of Shakespeare's work owned by him and by his father. So I decided in 2016 that we would do an exhibition just to, I suppose, to add a different dimension to Pearse and Shakespeare. And for Heritage Week then, what I wanted to do was maybe kind of dramatise that a little bit, dramatise the research that we had done, because Pearse's sister, Mary Bridget, wrote a lot about how the role Shakespeare had played in Pearse's life, and there's these kind of very kind of funny little kind of anecdotes about them as kids playing different roles, and Pearse kind of starting to laugh whenever he had to have a romantic scene with his sister. But anyway, there's lots of really, really interesting stories, and I thought it would make a really nice show, but obviously, no actors. So I went to all three of those groups and I said, okay, so we had a great time this year, didn't we? Just one little favour. And so they all took part, and I kind of broke up the different sections, and they all did a different section. And it was really, really successful. Tallaght Community Arts, they got some musicians for us as well, just to add a bit of music into it. And what was great about the event as well was, to a certain extent, it was a great kind of celebration of what we had done in 2016, and we were able to highlight it then in Heritage Week. So as I said, so all those favours, just put them at the back of your mind, and even years later, you can kind of ring people up. But as I said, people are always so happy to help. If you've been helpful to people, people are always happy to help you back, I find. The other thing as well is kind of staff enthusiasm. I showed you the one of our gardeners doing a demonstration. One of our other guides is very skilled at art and craft, so he does these great children's workshops, often very simple. There's a big emphasis as well on having something that the kids can bring away with them at the end of the workshop. And we find that kind of something that kids can drop in and out of with their parents is great as well. The other area is just that we looked at in particular last year and the year before was bees. We have beehives now in St. Enda's. This is Eddie, our gardener, who's one of our bee experts. Along with Martina, who runs our nature room. They look after the bees. He also discovered a cuckoo bee in St. Enda's, which hadn't been seen since the 1920s. So as well as bird walks, we also did bee walks, and we had these little identifiers so kids could capture bees, look at them, release them. I was a little worried at first. I was expecting all these kind of children being stung, but it was actually, they were really, really engaged with it, and it was. The equipment we had was great, just to allow them to look at the insects up close and then release them. It's a great event as well because it's kind of intergenerational, so you have kids and you have their parents who are also interested in nature. We were very lucky last year as well. If you have a sunny day, that makes a big difference. See in the far corner there, we have an image of a bird walk. And again, they're very social events as well, because people are, a lot of the time you're walking. I find on a bird watch, you don't see a lot of birds sometimes, but you get to talk to people quite a lot. And then there's real enthusiasm when you do spot something. And there was a lovely feeling at these events. And again, that theme this year about connecting people, just giving people opportunity to meet other people and in a friendly atmosphere. The other thing to look at as well is getting new audiences through Heritage Week. In 2013, it was the centenary of the performance of The Post Office by Rabindranath Tagore and Henri by P.H. Pearce in the Abbey Theatre. Pearce was in money trouble. He went to Yeats looking for help. Yeats said he would put on a double bill of one of Pearce's plays and a play by the Indian writer Rabindranath Tagore. Tagore is a huge figure in Indian literature. He's referred to as the Indian Shakespeare. He's credited with writing the words for both the Bangladeshi and the Indian national anthem. He's the only person who's written two national anthems. So he's a huge figure in India. And Yeats was a big fan. And Tagore was interested in Pearce, and Pearce was interested in Tagore because Tagore had also set up a school in India around the same time, which had a similar anti-imperial focus, and the idea of using education as a way of preserving native culture and, I suppose, resisting the onslaught of imperialism. And a few years later, after this performance in Dublin, in Tagore School, they performed Pearce's play, Henri, though they did it by moonlight by the Ganges, so somewhat different, I imagine, than the Abbey, but anyway. But it's a really interesting connection, this kind of connection across continents and this kind of post-colonial connection as well. So that year we did quite a lot of events around Indian connections, but we were also anxious maybe to make contact with new audiences and the Indian community. So we decided we would use Heritage Week as a way of connecting with that community. We made really good links with the Indian Classical Music Society of Ireland that year. They helped us a lot with our Indian Open Day. They provided musicians, dancing. We had kind of Indian painting as well. We had an exhibition of Indian artwork in the museum at that time as well. So there was all kinds of events that day. But again, Heritage Week was a great way of kind of pushing that and reaching that audience, because sometimes when you're looking for a very targeted audience, it can be very difficult to reach them. And the other thing that was great about the Indian Day was, of course, it wasn't just the Indian community, but the Irish community as well, who came and I think also found out about this connection that Piers had with India. So again, Heritage Week can be a great thing for a new initiative like that, where you're trying to reach audiences. Last year, one of the things that we did as well, there was some funding available within the OPW for a sign language interpretation. So we do these all the time. We actually have one on Sunday. There's going to be an interpreter available for a tour of the house on Sunday at 3 o'clock. But for Heritage Week, what we said is, well, maybe we could use this sign language interpreter for the tour of the Follies. So it gave a whole new kind of dimension, and a whole new audience then opened up for sign language. And it's a great way of reaching the deaf community. The other thing is, as I said, even though you often stick to your tried and trusted events, it can also be useful to try something new and something different. So I don't know if this is the easiest event to communicate, but we'd worked with a sound artist of mine called Jimmy Eady. He produced a sound walk, which is it consists of music and words relating to Piers. So Pierce's own words, and he also worked with some of the young people from Tallaght Community Arts. And it's available on our website, and I'm kind of always on Facebook pushing people to download it. The idea is that you listen to it as you walk around the grounds, and it's a really special experience. But for Heritage Week, because I suppose there was a bit of extra money available, but also an opportunity to do something, I hired 3 freestanding speakers, and we divided the sound walk into 3, and we just played it the whole afternoon, and we had kind of information then up at Emmett's Fort about the sound walk. And again, it was just kind of a way of maybe getting people to engage a little bit more with the sound walk. And it was also just something that was, it was a very hard event maybe to assess its success. But there was something really magical about just kind of wandering along and suddenly hearing the voice of Pierce and Pierce's words and music associated with him suddenly kind of emerging out of nowhere. So that's the other important thing I think with Heritage Week is to do things that I suppose invigorate you and invigorate your staff and keep your enthusiasm up. And I said, if any of you want to listen to the sound walk and get a sense of what we did, it is available on the website and it's free. So that's it from me. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Suddenly, it was very interesting you started to speak about Tagore, because what a little, not a very well-known fact is that what he, the words are translated from Hindu into English, but it was a lady from Roscommon, from Boyd, who actually wrote the musical score for it. Tagore has spent some time. She was one of the founding members of the Irish Franchise League. So Margaret Gillespie Cousins actually wrote the music for the Indian National Anthem.
Well, if you're interested in organising an Indian classical music concert for her, yeah. As I said, there's a very good kind of core group of people, and they do have people, musicians coming over on tours, and they're often looking for venues. So, and it's our Indian classical music events, I always want more people to attend them because it's a really interesting musical experience and completely different than the European musical experience. But and I think it's great as well just to show, you sometimes get the impression people try to give the impression that multiculturalism came to Ireland sometime about 1998, but to show that, there have been these connections for centuries. And I suppose, again, that's the theme maybe this year as well with Heritage Week and the European connection. It could be a good way of highlighting that there's kind of nothing new under the sun in terms of these connections. Okay, that's great. I think sorry.
I attended quite a few of the events at last year's Heritage Week, and they were really amazing. I attended it with my young family, and even though some of the, people might think that they might not be so suited to young children, and mine are maybe like over the age of 6. They were very welcomed, and it was a wonderful family experience.
Yeah, I think with Heritage Week in particular, that kind of family thing is really important, and just seeing that kind of intergenerational thing is really great. And one of the things we found out because of the summer holidays and things like that, bee walking, the bird walk, there's a lot of grandparents with grandchildren who are very anxious to find something to do with them. So I think there's a whole market that we're not tapping as much as we should be of people with kids during that time, particularly as it's coming towards the end of the holidays and they've kind of run out of everything else to do. So.
We went to O'Sheen's.
Oh yeah.
And I think actually my kids were the only kids there. And it was packed.
Yeah.
But it was, it was on in the evening, and we were very impressed with how welcome they were. They had a little look around.
Yeah.
Because they could go and see the bedrooms and all of that.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience.
With every event, we always make sure that the museum is open beforehand, because it can be a great way, because people do come back then as well. If they come for the event, often they'll come specifically for the event and they say, oh, I didn't know this was here. Yeah. And they'll tell us what a hidden gem we are. And I'm a bit tired of being a hidden gem. A little more well-known gem might be fine. Yeah. So, all right. Okay, that's great. Well, listen, I'll be around for coffee and all day, so if anyone has any other questions, but that's great. Thank you.